Welcome to this explainer, everyone. Today, we're tackling a massive topic for your IGCSE history revision. We are breaking down the complex and, frankly, dangerous relationship between the churches and the Nazi state. We're going to visually unpack exactly how the regime dealt with one of Germany's most powerful institutions, giving you the precise facts and analytical angles you need to really ace your exams.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll be looking at 1. The ideological clash, 2. The Reich Church experiment, 3. The confessional church pushback, 4. A war of attrition, and 5. The final exam verdict. Let's dive right in.
Starting with Section 1, the ideological clash.
So to what extent did the churches actually accept Nazi policies? This is the absolute core question we need to answer today. Now, think about it for a second. Nazi ideology and Christian beliefs were fundamentally complete opposites. But the reality on the ground? Both the Protestant and Catholic churches had literally massive followings all across the country. Because their core doctrines clashed so hard with Nazism, just the sheer existence of these deeply rooted religious institutions was an immediate, super-sensitive headache for the new regime.
To really grasp this conflict, you've got to understand a key term, Volksgemeinschaft. Essentially, the ultimate Nazi goal was to force every single German citizen into this unified, unquestioning national community. You can see the problem here, right? The churches, with their independent loyalties to God and strict moral codes, they stood directly in the way of this total ideological uniformity.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Reich Church experiment. Now, the Nazis knew a direct head-on assault was incredibly risky. But surprisingly, they found willing allies right inside the Protestant church itself. There was this movement known as the German Christians, or Deutsche Christen. And get this, they actually believed they could perfectly reconcile their faith with Nazi ideology. So with full state backing, they appointed Ludwig Müller as Reich Bishop to basically consolidate all Protestants into one easily controllable Reich Church. The whole thing was organized entirely around the Nazi leadership principle.
Moving on to Section 3, the confessional church pushback.
As you might guess, that heavy-handed attempt at total Nazi control immediately triggered a massive internal fracture. It's like a giant split right down the middle. On one side, you've got the Nazi-aligned Reich Church under Bishop Müller, aggressively trying to centralize all the power. But on the flip side, those actions by the German Christians sparked some fierce opposition. In September 1933, over 100 pastors pushed back and created the Confessional Church. Led by Pastor Niemöller, this faction fiercely rejected any Nazi links whatsoever and swore to uphold Orthodox Protestant beliefs. Take a look at these numbers, guys. These are the absolute perfect statistical anchors for your exam essays. We're talking about 7,000 out of Germany's 17,000 Protestant pastors breaking away to support the Confessional Church. I mean, that is a massive chunk of religious leadership actively refusing to be absorbed. It proved to the Nazis that their whole internal takeover strategy, it was totally failing.
Let's look at Section 4, a war of attrition.
Since a direct attack would alienate millions of everyday Germans, the regime opted for a slow, grinding war of attrition. Let's just trace the timeline here. In 1935, they set up a dedicated Ministry of Church Affairs. But over time, the resistance just kept growing. By 1937, things escalated. Pastor Niemöller was thrown into a concentration camp, and Pope Pius XI publicly attacked the Nazi system. Fast forward to 1940, and the Pope was even speaking out directly against the regime's horrific euthanasia program. To combat all this ongoing resistance, Hans Kerrl, the guy heading up that new Ministry of Church Affairs, launched some very specific, highly targeted measures to undermine religious influence. It was a really insidious, creeping kind of strategy. First, they tried to discredit church leaders with terrible smear campaigns, falsely accusing them of things like sexual abuse and financial misbehavior. Then, they systematically went after the church's future by reducing religion in public schools, closing down dedicated church schools, and completely shutting down church youth groups. By the mid-1930s, the Nazi Party even rolled out a church secession campaign to actively pressure everyday Germans to just abandon their churches entirely.
And finally, Section 5, the final exam verdict.
All right, so if you want a killer primary thesis statement for your exam, it should be this. The Nazis were never completely successful in coordinating the churches into the Volksgemeinschaft. Their own alternative, the German faith movement, it was a total failure and gained hardly any support. Meanwhile, the Confessional Church actually survived the intense pressure, and because high-profile individuals kept speaking out, it remained incredibly difficult and politically super dangerous for the Nazis to launch an outright, finalizing attack on religion. But hey,
Historical analysis for a top grade requires real nuance, right? Remember, the overwhelming majority of Germans were Christians who still largely supported the Nazi regime. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought to really punch up your exam conclusion. When the churches refrained from a sustained, all-out attack on the state, did their survival mean they actively resisted Nazi ideology? Or did they simply tolerate the horrors of the regime just as long as their own institutional walls remained standing? Think about that as you review. Good luck with your revision.